Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt. That fine gentleman over there, as always, the illustrious Dan Rubenstein, sir. Welcome back. Welcome to another week of college football talk here on the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Ty. My mood shifts with the weather. I always like to start with the weather. Things have been pretty nice here in the Chicagoland area, and I think the direction we're going these next couple weeks is pretty appropriate, right? We are looking at teams as they hopefully continue to blossom, Ty, right? Yes.
Yep.
And we're trying to be positive. We're trying to see the bright side of things, and we're looking for growth, Ty. And so I only feel it's appropriate that we go with the, I don't know what we're calling this, but we've decided to look at teams that are hopefully ascending to a new rung, a new tier in the sport, or getting back to, right? Returning to a place they think they should be, or they're recruiting like they want to be, or paying money like they want to be. So, I enjoy a good thematic tie-in, Ty. So here we are.
I'm ready. Thank you to everybody for stopping on by. This will be fun. As Dan said, we're going into a bit of a deep dive for a handful of teams. We're going to do that over the next 2 weeks. This week, it's teams that we are hoping can get to 8 wins.
Like a consistent 8.
Consistent 8, a steady 8. That's what we're going to be discussing this week. We've got guests that are going to help us do that.
Yep.
Jeff Ermann. Jeff Ermann, noted Maryland luminary, will be by a little bit later on in this podcast to talk through all things Maryland football and how they can get there. We'll get to that and much, much more. We will start, though, at the top with news, and then you and I picked a team each that we will discuss.
Yes.
Verballers.com is where you can go. Big week over at verballers.com.
Huge.
You've been boning up for the board meeting that we've got on Wednesday night?
I have been boning up for the board meeting. This week, we're speaking to our board, the people that, this happens during the season, that if you come in the top 4, 5, 6 picks, we figure out a cutoff point in our pick'em pool, our annual pick'em pool.
Top 5.
Top 5 become, at least for a year, they get the new responsibility of becoming a board member and, getting a peek behind the scenes and exercising some clout in terms of the future of the show and the future of the Verballers.com Patreon community.
Verballers.com also now, I think, alive with optimism over a watch party. Or a series of watch parties that have butted up over the course of the last week over on Discord. We're going to be picking out some old games, doing a watch along with the community. We're going to get in on that. So stop on over to verballers.com. You also can watch this episode live as we do it. You get early access to this episode and all of our episodes. We're doing our best to start ramping things up. We've got the aforementioned baseball show, the off-topic baseball show that we are in the process of putting together and we'll do shortly. So just because it's May and the dead of the off season does not mean that we are any less busy.
No.
Over at verballers.com. Make sure you follow on social media as well as YouTube. And if nothing more, hit subscribe on your app of choice. Shall we get to news?
Let's.
Payton Thorne. Payton Thorne going to Auburn. Payton Thorne, a multi-year starter at Michigan State, will be taking his talents to the Hugh Freeze Auburn system. Notably, Robbie Ashford, who got the majority of the reps last year, 49.2% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions a year ago. Hugh Freeze determining that that's probably not good enough to compete in the SEC. TJ Finley had already announced that he is going elsewhere. So Payton Thorne now seemingly is going to be the guy, going to be the dude at Auburn coming down. Now, I know you've been a bit of a Payton Thorne skeptic, Dan.
Sure.
Upgrade, not upgrade. What was your reaction upon hearing this?
Seems like an upgrade with the ceiling, right? If Auburn, I think in its right mind, says we don't see a future in which Robbie Ashford wins 8-9 games for Auburn minimum, which Auburn has a pretty high standard. This is a team that has won a national championship, played for another, has put a ton of players on both sides of the ball into the league. If they're saying to themselves, if Hugh Freeze is saying to himself, Payton Thorne, is at least decent, and we see upside there, and we think we have a better chance of winning more games in a tough division, a tough conference with Payton Thorne. Makes sense. I am not a huge believer that this is going to cure some of the things that still are concerns for Auburn's offense, and they've done a lot in the portal. I think it's fine, right? I think it's like a solid B- move, and look, there are classes that I wish I had finished with a B- in, so I'm good with it. I'm just tempering my expectations in terms of it being like a huge jump in terms of what Auburn will be able to do on offense with Thorne.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Payton Thorne's best season was clearly in 2021 when Michigan State also had a very good season, 27 touchdowns to just 10 interceptions. He had a completion percentage just north of 60%. The completion percentage ticked up last year, but some of the other numbers went in a different direction. He had more interceptions. He had fewer touchdowns. This was not a quarterback who had a ton of air yards, so it wasn't like he was airing it out deep. Right. In most cases, it was a lot of shorter stuff, but still has been very effective. And I think I agree with you. It's a step up from what Auburn's had. They're looking for some stability there at the quarterback position. Wouldn't surprise me if they try to find other people as well, but it seems like Payton Thorne is probably going to be the dude, at least at time of recording.
Goodbye low candidate, though, by the way. If you want to convince yourself that he was beat up last year behind a beat up offensive line, he had receiving talent. He's definitely had receiving talent these past couple years. There was a drop after Kenneth Walker left, but saying he's Joe Burrow coming from the Midwest and showing promise, no, obviously not. That is kind of silly. But saying these 3, 4, 5 things were stacked against him, and now he's going to a better situation offensively, I'll listen. Sure. Yeah,
I'll listen to the conversation about it being a better spot for him offensively. I think Hugh Freeze, love the guy, hate the guy, he knows how to coach offense, and I would expect that he'll find a way to put Payton Thorne in a good spot.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see what comes of that. Still waiting for official word on Keon Coleman. I know Twitter was alive this weekend. He took his official pictures as part of his visit to Florida State. Did not officially commit to Florida State, but looked good in Florida State in the whites that he had on wearing number 0.
Sure.
I saw that and I was like, ooh, that looks good. That would look really good.
Spicy.
But we'll see. We'll see where Keon Coleman decides to go. He also of Michigan State.
Did you see that how many teams he heard from? Did you see that graphic? I forget. I don't know if it was Hayes Fawcett or who. It was something like Keon Coleman reveals the 59 teams he's heard from since entering the transfer portal. And it was just like a wall. It was like the College Football Hall of Fame of helmets. It was like, oh, he heard from San Diego State. He heard from Oregon. He heard from Pitt. It was cool. Great.
Really cool. All right. Yeah. Elsewhere in college football news, Kansas State and Chris Kleinman are finalizing a new 8-year, $44 million contract. He'd earn about $5.5 million a season. Chris Kleinman, I think, has been an overwhelming success in his time at Manhattan, Kansas. It's nice that they're able to lock him up. I'm sure there would be other teams interested. Chris Kleinman, though, does not necessarily seem like the type of guy who was looking to upgrade or move elsewhere. He found a really good spot for him. He came over from North Dakota State. He followed his athletic director to K-State, and he has seen, I think, pretty immediate success upon getting there. I'm excited about what 2023 has in store for the Wildcats, but it's a good move for them to lock him up, to pay him more and to make sure that he sticks around, because it seems like they've gotten to a point of relative stability. And now as we move forward in the new version of the Big 12, sans Texas and Oklahoma, it stands to reason that K-State's one of the perennial favorites, at least with the way things
they won it last year.
They won it last year.
With
the
Texas and Oklahoma there. Not like Texas is out here winning Big 12 titles anytime recently.
No. So it's a good move. It's a good move.
It's a very good move, and it also points to the fact that there was probably... I mean, look, he's given this extension. He's earned this extension because of what Kansas State has accomplished on the field recently. But also, you look at some of the places that have opened up recently, and you look at his own geographic footprint. Wisconsin, Nebraska, probably points to the fact that tires were kicked, and Chris Kleinman went to an administration he knows really well and said, look, this is what's out there. What are we doing with my contract? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Or
I don't think he's necessarily testing the waters. No. And actively looking for another job. But look, to not use that as leverage would kind of be a crime in and of itself.
Oh, of course.
So you got to do what you got to do. And I'm sure he's got agents that know what they're doing on this front. and negotiated a nice pay increase for him.
Yeah, and Kansas State knows what the wrong guy can and can't do in Manhattan, and so Chris Kleinman clearly being the right guy, got to make sure he's happy.
Again, 8 years, $44 million, $5.5 million a year is what it looks like for him. That will be
probably a
finalized
steal
soon.
in this market. Yeah,
big time.
Yeah.
Big time value buy. The final tidbit I have here on the news front, and I'm not sure if you saw this, Dan, College Football Playoff released its schedule for 2024 and 2025. So this is the upgraded, in some cases upgraded, certainly expanded 12-team College Football Playoff. The main features include a first round of games, 4 first-round games that are played on campus, a triple header.
That's confirmed? That's confirmed.
That is confirmed.
Okay.
It is confirmed. So first-round games are on campus, which is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And, well, it's like during the first full week of bowl games. So I think I scheduled it out. It would like be along the same timeline as like the Boca Raton Bowl or the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. Right in that first wave of bowl games, you're going to get on that Friday and into that first Saturday, the on-campus games, which college football will be drunk with enthusiasm on that week, having those games. That goes from maybe like the week of games that people pay the least amount of attention to suddenly the one that I think will be maybe one that we circle on our calendars, because it'll be really exciting to have those big, meaningful games on campus. Regardless of what you think of the broader playoff scheme, having those games on campus that week would be pretty cool. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there will be quarterfinal action.
What day of the week is that happening, by the way?
Friday into a Saturday.
Friday and Saturday we're getting, so that would be it's 8 teams playing 4 games, so 2 on each day?
Correct.
Is that
it's they're playing 1 game on that first day.
On Friday.
And then 3.
Got it.
The following day.
And are they competing with the NFL? Has the NFL gone to Saturday games yet at that point?
I do not believe so.
Okay.
I do not believe so. I don't.
For some reason, I felt like
I
I saw that there was some crossover, but I don't know if that's this year or what.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously the contract changes.
Obviously, they are trying their best to not contend
right
with the NFL. Only so much they can do. But certainly as they get deeper into this thing, they're going to try their best to not contend with the NFL.
Okay.
Which I think makes a lot of sense. Obviously,
yeah,
that's what they're trying to do. But the first round of games starts on Friday, December the 20th. There is 1 game on campus, and then the following day, December the 21st, is when there are 3 games on campus.
So I'm seeing, this is Ross Dellinger, not to contradict you, Ty, because we're on the same team here. But I'm seeing, as I use Google quickly on my my very fast connection, that was mean. That was a shot at you. 1 game will be played Friday night, December 20th, and 3 games Saturday, December 21st. As you just said, the NFL begins playing Saturday regular season games that weekend.
Okay.
So I don't know if scheduling is going to be happening early versus late, or if there's some sort of concession and cooperation, but there is going to be crossover that Saturday.
Then as we progress forward into the quarterfinals, we have a setup with a triple header of playoff action on New Year's Day. There will be 1 game per this schedule played on New Year's Eve, which I guess, I hate the New Year's Eve game, not even because of going out, but I just hate it. I hate it so much. But they're only going to play 1 game moving forward on New Year's Eve. They're going to have a triple header of action, quarterfinal games, New Year's 6 bowl games that are played throughout the course of the quarterfinals and semifinals. So 1 game New Year's Eve, 3 games New Year's Day, and then a week out from that, they're playing games on Thursday and Friday, and determining who goes into the national championship game, which is going to be played a little bit later on January the 20th. So they basically extend the season out by 10 days. They have incorporated the New Year's 6 bowl games and also a wave of games that are played on campus.
Okay. I'm extremely curious. I am eager to learn what happens. I don't care about TV ratings that much, but I'm eager to see just how the flow of an expanded playoff affects people's habits and what people think of traveling to campuses. If they're not going to travel to campus, but they're hoping they win so they can go to a neutral site game because it's in Miami or it's in Dallas, and that seems more appealing than where they live in Pittsburgh, wherever. No disrespect to Pittsburgh. I'm just, there's so many new moving pieces that I'm curious to see. the consequences. Because I've been very clear that this does not appeal to me in the way that scarcity appeals to me. That, we're pointing all of our attention to this one big game or these two big games or whatever, and I just think that we're getting away from the actual meat of the sport a little bit too much. But that's just, look, I'm an old fart, I guess, at this point. I'm in my mid to late 30s, and
oh my gosh.
I know your generation has made peace with this.
Yeah.
No, I'm genuine. I'm being extremely as genuine as I can be. I want to see what happens.
I think that first week of games will be rabid with college football optimism. I think there will be so much intrigue having these games on campus that we've never seen anything like that before. That will be cool. And certainly incorporating the New Year's Six games. I could take or leave the bowl games. I don't so much care about that whole traditional tie-in, but I am curious as well to see when we see a drop-off. Like, I could very much see a situation in which we have crazy ratings for the first round, for the second round, and then the third round comes and nobody cares.
Right.
Or fewer people care, maybe because there are fewer teams playing, but it could end up being a situation like we've got now with the championship where there's obviously a spike in interest around it, but in terms of ratings, I think we'll probably see more early. But I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, of course. I think you'll see more early in the process too, right? You'll see more early 24, 25 than like, what does the playoff rating look like in 2029? Again, these are things that our show is not affected necessarily. We're going to do our show, whatever. I wonder what happens with, it obviously puts less weight, whatever you want to say about the regular season, but conference championship games, like, are Michigan fans buying a ton of tickets to get to a game in Indianapolis, Ohio State fan? Like, is that going to be just sort of like the child that's left at the zoo, right? Like, is that the forgotten piece of this all, that like we have this like weird TV event that is now kind of seen as passe, and unless you are a team like, Purdue, who's not in that game a whole lot, and they made it last year. That's a cool thing. But yeah, I wonder what this does to conference championship games. I wonder what it does to people's travel schedules. This is when people save up money for the end of the year, going away around Christmas, whatever, visiting family. All of a sudden, is there still going to be the enthusiasm? Like, all right, well, we went to an away game in October, and we're going to the rivalry game. We're going to a playoff. Are we spending money last second? Like, I just, it's fascinating to me that college football, which has struggled at times to find a mainstream audience in the way that other sports have, is going to make it more difficult for a mainstream audience to keep track of the sport. Maybe. I'm wrong all the time. I could be wrong here.
The related news, and I won't spend too much time on this, but we talked about it briefly when they were putting this whole thing together, but there are some Big Ten stadiums that just do not feel like they are equipped to handle a playoff game. And so places specifically like Wisconsin and Penn State have kickstarted operations to, in effect, winterize a stadium. Up at Camp Randall, they're installing heaters underneath the field turf to make it a little bit more palatable if they're playing games in sub-freezing temperatures. At Penn State, they're installing new pipes. I pulled this sound. It's all pipes! Just because I wanted to use it. But they're installing new pipes and a couple other upgrades to make sure that the stadium is usable in sub-freezing temperatures. These are knock-on effects, maybe not big deals, and certainly if you're a Penn State or a Wisconsin, you'll figure out a way around it. But just notable what a big change in the sport has down to kind of like the specific stadium level.
It's going to be a big home field advantage. And I'm not even talking about southern teams going up north, right, that aren't used to playing in frigid temperatures. I'm just like, if you're a Georgia fan and you find yourself having to travel to Wisconsin or Penn State, like, I don't know if I want to leave Georgia in December. Yeah. And so you'll just have a higher concentration of home fans there. So
I love that. I love that bit. I don't know. So that's all I got in terms of news. Again, Payton Thorne to Auburn, K-State and Chris Kleinman are re-upping, and the college football playoff released its expanded format. We'll continue knocking off some news tidbits here over the span of the next 2 weeks, but those seem to be the headline things that you need to pay attention to and care about, Dan.
Yeah.
Shall we get to the main event?
Let's get to the main event. So what we're doing this week, we're using the number 8. Next week, we're using the number 10, and we are trying to figure out why teams haven't recently, can they get back to soon, and what the status is today of a couple of teams today, or 3 teams today, 3 teams later in the week. We're going 8 games this week. I've proposed the term Exceller 8. It's terrible. It's definitely terrible.
it's a little too startup-y for me, like a tech bro thing
course.
out in Silicon Valley. I don't hate it,
Right.
but I don't fully embrace it either.
Yeah. I found it. I've come up with worse, Ty. I've definitely come up with worse.
What I really like is the sound, though.
Yeah. So look, it's all about taking next steps. We're going Arizona, Georgia Tech, Maryland.
Yeah.
I have Arizona. You have Georgia Tech. Arizona in 2014 won more than 8 games. They ended up in the Pac-12 championship game, got demolished by Oregon, a team, though, they had beaten earlier on in the season. Oregon went on to go to the national championship game, Heisman winning quarterback. But Arizona, Anu Solomon, if you remember that name,
I do.
A future Baylor transfer. Have had big names in the desert since they have Rich Rod, Kevin Sumlin, now Jedd Fisch, not a huge name, but successful on offense this past year. And the question is, Arizona as an athletic department has had very successful teams. The basketball team is the headline program on that campus.
Basketball school, Dan. We've heard that before.
Basketball school, of course. Lute Olson, all sorts of huge names coming through Arizona. Mike Bibby, as you know.
Bibby, yeah.
We're talking about a program that has had some downtimes. Kevin Sumlin kind of drove it into the ground. And the hiring of Jedd Fisch, I think, was met with a lot of enthusiasm. And they went 5-7 last season. They had the number one most explosive, or the explosive play rate on offense was the best in the country. There was a lot of positives to take away. They've hit the portal hard. They have a quarterback of the future. There's a lot to like about Arizona, and they played some really close. They beat UCLA. They played some close teams, close games against good teams, decent teams. Didn't make a bowl game, but things appear to be heading in the correct direction. And so what I'm going to say is, there's very little reason right now, today, in early May, that Arizona can't be flirting with 8 wins every year. My question to you is, I think, a broader question, and that's not just, relevant to Arizona's interests or Georgia Tech or Maryland or any of these teams' interests. It's, what is the difference between a team that wins 5 or 6 games and 8 games? Usually it's, well, you want better players, you want more better players. But generally speaking, it comes down to winning very small moments. It's, not going 3 and out on your first 3 drives in a game. Or when you have the opportunity, down 3 late, don't commit a backbreaking holding penalty from your right guard or whatever, or a backbreaking, pass interference penalty or something like that extends a drive, and then that team scores, right? It's the little things. It's that combination, the aggregate of a ton of little things. On 4th and 3 from your own 48, don't punt it when it's a back and forth offensive game, right? It's those decisions that ultimately are the difference between either making a bowl and not making a bowl, or you lose a bunch of close games, and those are the difference between, those L's and W's. And that was true of Arizona, who had an opportunity to win more games last year. When you look at the way they lost the Washington game, the way that they lost the Wazoo game, the way that they lost the USC game, these games were not catastrophically out of hand. They were up against Cal at half, and Jada Knott just exploded. I mean, He exploded all game long. He ran for damn near 300 yards. But Arizona's defense has been catastrophic. Didn't change much last year, though it wasn't always the problem. And so for me, for Arizona, it's, okay, Jedd Fisch has an offensive background. He has a quarterback of the future. He's been able to recruit and develop offensive skill guys. The offense should be in pretty good hands, despite some transfers, whatever. They lose, Dorian Singer to USC, a promising young receiver. But the offense appears like it's on track to be successful in the short term. So the question is, how do you fill out a defense? Is it a strategy thing? They've hit the portal hard for front 7 guys, from big places. Now it's a question of, how do we get from being catastrophically bad on defense to frisky, 83rd best defense in the country instead of 124th or something like that? And so I don't think the conference situation is great. We don't know where Arizona is going to be long term as we await Pac-12 TV stuff. But the way that Arizona is recruited, the way that stadium can be, it can be a rowdy place. I see no reason that Arizona in the next 2 or 3 years that they can't win 8 games. I'm just not so super sold on the teams around them in the conference, with ASU starting over with a new coach, with UCLA kind of already in that 8-win mold, but not crazy dangerous all the time, with the Bay Area schools, with the conference going divisionless, with Colorado needing some time. I'm still high on Arizona if those decisions, those Jaden DeLora has a 4-interception game randomly against, I think, Wazoo. It's just like, if they are winning moments more often, they're winning 7-8 games to me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, 2 to 3 years, sure. I don't know about this coming year.
I see 7 as totally doable this year, which is 2 more than 5.
This looks like a tough schedule to me.
Okay.
This year. I feel like a good number of the teams, not all of the teams, but a good number of the teams in this schedule are better. I think Oregon State is better.
But where's that game?
The game is in Arizona.
Yeah. It's where,
which is helpful.
It's Tucson, much like we talked about last year with Syracuse,
it's a weird
or a
place.
couple of years ago. It's where good teams go to die. It just is.
I get it. But I'm just looking at this thing and I'm saying, all right, well, you've got some duds, some winnable games. You've got Stanford, that's probably winnable. Northern Arizona, that's winnable. Sure. Colorado, more than winnable. Probably even Arizona State. Winnable. But there's a game against Utah. They should be pretty good. UCLA should be pretty good. Oregon State is improved. Washington State, I'm not sure, but that game is in Pullman, right? USC, Washington, at Mississippi State. There are a lot of landmines on the schedule. Yeah. And so what I fear, just in terms of wins and losses, I think you're right on with respect to the talent and the coaching staff. And just in general, there are good vibes around the Arizona program. It feels like things are moving with a good sense of momentum towards something greater. So I agree that 2 to 3 years feels like it's doable. But in the short term here, I fear that this is a team that could statistically improve, but in terms of wins and losses, that they might not get back to where they were a year ago. Sure. Five wins is probably doable, but there's a chance it could only get to 4 because of what I'm seeing here.
Totally.
And I think that will be a bit of a mirage. I hope people don't read too deeply into that because I like what Jedd Fisch has done.
Yeah, look, there's talent on the roster, and I'm still willing to say that, and this is true of both Arizona schools, to be clear, that in the portal era, what you can do in terms of picking off decent players along the West Coast or even the Midwest, or even looking east to Texas or wherever, that this is a landing spot where you can focus on football. Again, true of both ASU and Arizona, though Tucson's a little bit more removed, than Tempe. That you can fill in gaps. It's a portal destination in the way that a lot of schools aren't necessarily. That, this is warm down here. Oh, people are just sort of happy to be here, right? And so I am good with the possibility of, Arizona adds Justin Flo, who did not live up to his 5-star status at Oregon. He struggled at times to sort of pick up the defense and pick up receivers in pass coverage. But fresh start for a lot of these guys. They added a top tier former blue chip defensive lineman from Georgia. His name's Bill, which I always appreciate.
Big Bill. Yeah.
Big Bill. I can appreciate that Arizona is a place that, look, academics aren't going to keep you away from transferring you there, right? I'm good with it. I'm good with Arizona being a bigger, brighter landing spot in this new area. You're from San Diego State and you want to go up a level. You want, like, that kind of thing, I think, is meaningful. And so I think Jedd Fisch is going to continue to be aggressive in building this roster into something dangerous. Because, look, who wants to play in Tucson at 11 p.m. Eastern? Not many teams. So, I don't know. I'm in.
A weird non-conference matchup that I found on the Arizona front. Starting next year, they've got a home-and-home with K-State.
Yep.
Like week 2, week 3 of the college football season, which is a non-traditional matchup, but I think will be very interesting. 2 programs that, are kind of in different spots. We just talked about Chris Kleinman, but I like what Arizona's doing. I do. I think they're on the right path. And as the Pac-12 takes on a new form in the absence of both USC and UCLA, again, we don't know the long-term viability of the conference. That's probably a separate discussion.
Sure.
But Arizona is one of those teams that at least feels like it's headed in the right direction. And that in and of itself is promising.
Yeah. I'd give them, in terms of winning 8 games, regular season games, so we're talking 8-4, 2 out of 3 years, I'd say there's a 38% chance of it happening in the way that the Pac-10 will be, if in that universe in which it's a Pac-10 as currently constituted. Sure. I think 3 or 4 out of 10 universes will have Arizona winning 8 games more often than not, in terms of where the trajectory is today in early May.
I think that sounds right, Dan.
Yeah.
That sounds right to me. So you're bullish on
I think so.
Arizona long term.
I think there's buy-in within the program. I think there's recruiting momentum, and you mentioned this season specifically. I sort of saw 7 there if things break correctly and they win those bigger moments. Mississippi State's going to be a big wild card, obviously, for crazy, unfortunate reasons, starting over with the passing of Mike Leach. But no, in terms of what Arizona has going for it, I think the stonk is pointing upwards, Ty.
The over-under, by the way, is 5.5. We've got a whole series of over-under shows that we'll do a little bit later on this offseason when we've got more detail on who is transferring in, who is transferring out, that type of thing. But just for a reference point, 5.5 is your over-under.
Yeah. By the way, just totally brutal. I think they had it was like a 4th and goal at one point, or excuse me, like a 3rd and goal, like 3rd and 2 or 2nd and 2 or something. It had a back-breaking holding penalty. They're down 3 to Washington last year, and I want to say it was a defensive holding on 3rd and 11 that extended a drive from their own 29 or something.
Brutal.
So, yeah, and those are those moments, right? And then those are the moments late, and then it's the moments early where it's just like the first 3 drives, they had -6 total yards. And it was like, Arizona, if there's something I can very specifically prescribe to win more games immediately, it's be ready to move the ball early in both the first and second halves, and good things happen. Because eventually they got going basically against everybody offensively. It was coming out and stalling in the first half or coming out and stalling in the second half. You're like, that's backbreaking, right? When you have so little margin of error to play with because of your defense, offense has to be well-oiled machine immediately.
Can you give me that step-by-step sound again? Let's talk some Georgia Tech, baby. Let's talk. Listen, I really dove in on Georgia Tech.
Okay.
I've been studying Georgia Tech for hours on end in preparation for this conversation. I was all in on Jeff Collins.
Sure.
When he was hired to be the guy. Jeff Collins was fired at the end of September after losing to UCF. Just a few games into, I guess, his 4th season with Tech. Never won more than 3 games in a season. I loved so much when they brought him on. I was crestfallen to see that it was not working out. And we knew in advance of this firing that it was probably going to happen. I love the fact that he was enthusiastic, that he went hard at selling Atlanta. I thought that was really smart to make it like, I don't know, a cool destination for recruits. It certainly can be. It certainly still can be that. But it just didn't work. The biggest problem for Jeff Collins, and perhaps this is being overly simplistic, Dan, is that switching from the Paul Johnson option offense to anything else was always going to be hard.
Guy after the guy. Yeah.
Guy after the guy. And it was always going to be hard. That was always going to be the case. Year 1 was catastrophic on offense. It did improve gradually over the course of the next 2 seasons. Last season, though, got off to a bit of a rocky start, and then he was let go.
Yeah.
So after he's let go, they turned things over to Brent Key, who eventually now gets the job. The finishing tally was 5-7. I thought a pretty good job by Brent Key. He takes over. He does a really good job salvaging the season. He builds up enough goodwill to get that job on a long-term basis, despite rumors about Deion Sanders or somebody else being open to the job as well. What really jumps out is how bad that offense was last season and what he was working with to try and get to that 5-7 mark.
Right.
Again, there was not much he could do about this, Dan. Really, there was not much he could do about this. But immediately upon taking over, he gets a win over Pitt and a win over Duke, 2 bowl teams, 2 teams that finished with 9 wins on the season, 2, I think, pretty good ACC teams, immediately upon getting that job. Also of note, you'll recall Jahmyr Gibbs left this team at the start of the season, transferred out. Jeff Sims went down for the year, end of October, middle of October. The offense kind of collapsed under its own weight. The offensive line was really bad, constantly in flux, constantly had that air of uncertainty around it, just not good. The eye-popping stat to me about the Georgia Tech offense last season, you know what the average distance was on 3rd downs they were facing?
No, I do not off the top of my head.
8.3 yards was their average. Their average distance on 3rd downs. I don't care who you are. You can be Alabama.
Yeah.
8 yards per 3rd down attempt is not going to give you great results. So it was just bad. It was just bad across the board. It didn't help that Jeff Sims got hurt, that Jahmyr Gibbs transferred out. Of course, it would be a very simplistic point of view to just say those are the reasons that it happened, but they had all sorts of things go wrong on offense, and I think it was headlined by some of those things that I mentioned. Defensively, they had a little bit of bite, like
a little bit, yeah.
Pass rush was, albeit pretty respectable. In the red zone, they forced some turnovers. They showed some bite there. The pass defense was much better than the rush defense by a fairly wide margin. The broader point that I think we should take away with us into 2023 is that the defense improved as the season wore on. It got better. And that is at least a building block as we move forward now into 2023. We didn't do the Brent Key year one debrief because it just felt weird. Yeah. We'll give him a full season before we do that. We'll do it next season.
Agree.
But we wanted to talk about Tech as part of this conversation because they're just fascinating. Now, in the offseason, now his first full offseason as the guy, he did a couple things that I actually really like.
Talk to me.
The first is that he named Buster Faulkner as the new offensive coordinator. This is a guy who's got play calling experience from his time at Southern Miss, at Arkansas State, and Middle Tennessee. Recently an analyst with Georgia. Listen to Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett glows about Buster Faulkner, credits him for a lot of his own development and for perhaps getting him to New York in some way, shape, or form as a Heisman contender. What I think we can take away from his previous experience at his other stops is he likes to run a balanced offense. He seems willing to adapt his system to the personnel on hand. And shockingly, when he's got a decent quarterback to work with, the offense tends to flourish a little bit more. This does not necessarily separate Buster Faulkner apart from other offensive coordinators, right? Obviously, you have a good quarterback, that helps. But what we've seen in his resume here is that when he's got that guy, he is able to make things happen. I like the fact that he's adaptable. He's not going to go full Deion Sanders and like control alt delete the offense and start over. He's willing to work with what he's got. He's also got a pretty good relationship with the offensive line coach, which is nice. The counterpoint I would add briefly to the whole Faulkner thing is if you're a Georgia Tech fan, it's very easy to look at this and say, wait, this is the best we could do.
Right.
The best we could do as an analyst from Georgia, but you could say that about any offensive coordinator. To go back to Bama, right? You could say that about Tommy Rees. We did say that about Tommy Rees. This is the best they can do. So different context, but second guessing of coordinators is something that will far outlast Buster Faulkner or Tommy Rees or any other hire. So I don't mind it. I don't mind the hire. I think it's fine. They also are bringing back Marco Coleman along the defensive line. A lot of good vibes with this move, man.
Okay.
A lot of good vibes. He's in the Georgia Tech Hall of Fame. He played there. He was a 2-time All-American. He was a first-round draft pick from there. This is the kind of thing that if they want to improve, this is a guy who hopefully can at least help them rebuild that side of things. The defensive line should be a strength this year for Georgia Tech, and hopefully Coleman can help them, take a step forward in that regard. Like the coach, he's got deep roots with the program, and I don't think that hurts. He can help sell it to a degree that others who maybe don't have the passion cannot. I like that.
Okay.
I also like what they did in the portal. If we go back to the offense for a second, there's a bit of a reboot underway. And we've talked about, we've talked about this time and again in this portal era. It does give new coaches an opportunity to take a step forward much more quickly than before, where you had to recruit and develop. Now you can bring guys in, and they did. They brought in Haynes King from A&M. Haynes King came to Texas A&M as sort of like Jimbo's guy. Jimbo loved Haynes King. It didn't work out. There were injury issues. Obviously, they're going in a different direction with Connor Wegman. Haynes King committed fairly early to Georgia Tech, and he had a good spring game. It seems like he's going to be the dude. No reason not to think so. They also bring in 3 wideouts that I think are going to be slotted in as the X, the Y, and the Z almost immediately. Christian Leary, Chase Lane, 2 of the notable names coming over from Bama and A&M respectively.
Right.
They've also got a transfer tight end, Brett Seether, who comes up from Georgia. I saw when he was initially recruited, they had compared him to Ricky Seals-Jones. You know who that is? Big bodied guy. I think the passing game is going to be a lot better. I'm not sure about the line. The line is like they still got some experience coming back, but there remains a lot of uncertainty there. The line's ultimately going to determine how good this offense is, but I like the fact that there's some returning experience. I like the fact that they've basically gone out and retooled the whole thing otherwise. I think it was needed.
Can I cut you off? Is that something I can do right here?
It's your show. Yeah.
I have no idea if the retooled line will be any good, if the receiving transfers will be any good, if Haynes King will be any good. When you look at Georgia Tech football, if you're to zoom out, if you are to suddenly leap into the air and look down 10,000 feet upon the Georgia Tech program, whether or not you like Brent Key, that's fine. You seem to like Brent Key. I don't know enough. My question to you is the ACC a place where Georgia Tech can, because they didn't really win 8 games a year, 8+ games a year under Paul Johnson. They had magical 11-game runs where they'd, end up in the Orange Bowl or something and dominate teams on the ground, obviously on offense in a very specific system. Is there something that you can tell that Georgia Tech is going to do very specifically extremely well, like they did when they ran the ball well, or are playing defense super well, or whatever their plan is? Because it seems like these programs that struggle to get out of the will they, won't they bowl seesaw, go 5-7 or 7-6, whatever. Is there something that you see Georgia Tech being able to do extremely well quickly? Like Virginia got way better on defense. They were catastrophically bad a couple years ago,
which we didn't see coming. We didn't expect that.
They make the great defensive coordinator hire from, I think it was Air Force, and things improve. Now, Virginia's talent level didn't get way better. And so Georgia Tech's talent level right now probably isn't demonstrably better than where it was the past couple years. So is it a defense thing? You mentioned the line where it's like, okay, they don't have the guys, they don't have the star power, but they're going to teach defense well, and they're going to play hard, and they're going to be respectable more quickly than people think. Is it going to be an offensive thing where it's just like they're going to outscore a bunch of teams in an always flawed ACC?
I think 2 things. First off, you mentioned the defensive line. I mentioned the defensive line. I think the defensive line will be solid, especially the interior defensive line.
Sure.
That will be the strength of the defense. I like Miles Sims at cornerback.
Sure.
Everything else kind of feels like it's in flux. The linebacking core is kind of a mess and a lot of transfers there. But I think defensively up front, which is a good enough place to start, that can be kind of the engine that drives the defense, which again had some bite last year and I think can improve this season.
Okay.
I think if only by default, they have to be better in their passing game. Their passing game was atrocious last season. Again, Jeff Sims went down. Even before he went down, he wasn't great. I just think new personnel coming in, new offensive mind coming in, who has thrown the ball at previous stops with like Brett Stockstill, remember that name? I mean, he's had some success with quarterbacks who are above average, to say the least. And I think immediately you're going to see some lift there on that side of the football. Bigger picture, though?
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. Yeah.
See, bigger picture, we get into this conversation about portal versus recruiting and what that marriage looks like between the two of them. It's great to go out and get Haynes King and 3 transfer wideouts and a tight end, add a little bit of help. They did add some help along the offensive line as well. It's great to do that and to hope for that immediate pop. But to ultimately get to more stable footing, it's a recruiting thing. You could hit or miss in the portal, but you got to build up your 2 deep with guys that you're bringing in via just the normal standard issue high school recruiting game.
Sure.
And in the first full off season, Brent Key's class was 12th out of 14 in the ACC.
And not even a full off season, to be clear. He
not
was
even
named
a full
interim and then full time. So this is the class of 2024 is his
this
first
is the
full
one
off-season.
This is the one that we need to look at.
Same
but
page.
early returns not necessarily there with what we saw. Hope is not a good strategy with respect to life or injury problems in college football.
Right.
And right now, I think the issue is you can go out, you can get these guys in the portal, you can maybe improve your production right away, but I don't know if the depth is necessarily there. If you're talking about longer term, building this thing into a steady 8-win program, you got to build depth. And I just don't see it yet. Maybe they will get there in the short term with smart recruiting and finding ways to plug guys in and let them play early so they don't transfer out or, I don't know. But I think depth is what they need to do, what they need to focus on. And they also need to remain aggressive in the portal because until they get that depth, they're going to need to plug and play guys in order to keep this thing moving forward. I like the fact that they were able to siphon off guys from some big programs, though, to come in and play right away. Haynes King, notably, Christian Leary, another one, the tight end from Georgia, another guy. Like, sure. I like that Georgia Tech is trying to fill that void and plug guys in right away. But some combination of those two recruiting tactics, I think, is going to play a really big part in this. It does for every program, but it certainly will for Brent Key, because I think, Atlanta's a cool spot. You can recruit guys to go to Atlanta. Sure. It's central to many of the talent hubs within college football. I don't think it's hard to find guys that want to go and play there, but you got to show them something, right? You got to show that this is actually going somewhere. And that's why I like what they did on offense. I think it can help them win more games right away.
Yeah. Geographically, it's crazy advantageous. The problem is there's a number of schools within a couple hours that are playing bigger games in front of bigger audiences and more NFL. Like, it's just, it's the good and the bad. And so at that point you say, okay, we're going to invest in coaches. We're going to invest in guys who have traditionally done more with less. And we're going to invest in coaches and a recruiting department that is beloved by every single high school coach in the greater whatever radius. Well, because you need to find guys, you need to unearth guys who, and not just unearth guys who are going to be awesome for 3 or 4 years, unearth guys who you have to understand after a couple of years might leave. Because
that's exactly right.
You're looking at Jahmyr Gibbs. You're looking at star power at Georgia Tech means even bigger star power at 7 different schools within 2 or 3 hours.
Within 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
If the early returns on the recruiting side, on the high school recruiting side, are any indication, there is clearly a focus on the state of Georgia.
Sure.
The class that they are reeling in now, the 2023 class, is one that I would describe as hyper-local. It is comprised almost entirely of guys from Georgia. There are a few oddballs who come from as far away as Florida or South Carolina.
Jeff Sims from Florida, yeah.
Or Alabama. Oh. But for the most part, it is very, very focused on that precise geographic footprint that Atlanta and Georgia Tech finds itself in. Whether they need to expand those horizons at all, whether or not they've got the budget or the reach or even the star power to do so, that will be a question moving forward. I don't think you necessarily need to do that, but early, I guess, analysis there is that it's very, very central to Georgia. So we'll see. I look at this schedule. The over/under is 4 wins for Georgia Tech. And I think that's a little heavy-handed, frankly. I could definitely see them going over 4 wins. I'm also the type of guy who is pretty optimistic about almost everybody. I don't want to see the downside, but as I look across this slate of games, I see, 1 win against South Carolina State. I see a Wake Forest team that I don't know which direction they're going. Bowling Green. They can beat Bowling Green, Boston College, Virginia. Right. These are teams that they could beat. Again, Syracuse is a team that I think they could beat at home late in the season. So we will do the over/under show in due time. I'm not going to make that prediction now, but I saw 4 and I looked at the schedule and I looked at what they're bringing in and I thought, okay. I'm not sure that they're getting to 8 wins in 2023.
Oh, no, they're not. But
could they get to 6 wins? Could they get to 5 wins again? That's a different conversation.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm putting words into your mouth, is there's excitement. There are things to like about the Georgia Tech program in the short term, but if we're talking about the odds that Georgia Tech, again, 8-win program means you have your act together on both sides of the ball, and in that, you also are doing something excellently well, right? There has to be some sort of calling card, and that's TBD with Georgia Tech and where they are right now. So we're saying Georgia Tech is going to do a thing really well. They're going to manage the roster really well. They're going to recruit and develop above what, at least I guess, our perception of their ceiling is. And they're going to take advantage of a perennially topsy-turvy conference that, like, this team has a great quarterback, but they can't tackle anybody. This team has improved on defense, but they can't move the ball at all. That is the story with the ACC, where they're going to be out-talented by Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. That's just those are games that if those teams are playing anywhere near their potential with what we perceive the talent on the roster look like, that's going to be really, really tough annually. Add in Georgia every year.
That's the problem. That makes it very difficult.
Basically a loss as it stands right now every single season in the Georgia schedule, or the Georgia portion of their schedule, that they need to be the solidest solid team that ever solided every single week.
I think that's right.
They're just always able to take advantage of deeply flawed portions of teams. That's really hard. It's really difficult, and never screw up on 4th and 2. It's just the margin for error is so razor thin with Georgia Tech that unless some giant chunk of the ACC falls off a cliff, it's really tough to construct that in my pea brain mind.
Here's one thing, though, that I do like, and we will move on to our guest of honor here momentarily. They did get better. They did get better, at least on defense, and I think they would have gotten better on offense if not for the fact that Jeff Sims went down on October the 20th in the game against Virginia. Mm-hmm. That does not mean they would have gone to a bowl game. It might have mean that they would have beaten Virginia and gotten to 6 wins. But still, I don't know if we can say that that's a given. I don't know if they're winning any other games that they lost. But I felt like the team rallied. The team got better in some aspects. I also feel like some of the games that they won, I'm looking at like the North Carolina game or even the Virginia Tech. Like there were some games across the board here where you look at the post-game win expectancy and it's like below 50%.
Right.
And that means that they were scrapping, man.
Yeah.
That they were playing hard. And even though something was clearly not working, they found a way to get the job done.
Sure.
I tend to look at stuff like that and say, okay, was this team playing hard? Was this team not playing hard? There were also games like against Georgia, against Miami, against Florida State, where they were downright awful. They're really bad. In those games, they never stood a chance. But there were other games that they were able to pick off along the way to get to 5 wins that, I think it's clear that they played hard for Brent Key. And so I'm curious to see what he could do now the full season.
I totally agree. And we're also talking about a conference in which a first-year coach last year at Duke was like 3 minutes from going 11-1.
That's exactly right.
And so
you never know.
There's so many flaws in this conference. There's so many this quarterback is injured and they have nobody behind him at this place, right? That exists in the ACC. It is a crazy conference in which a team that merely has its act together, can win a ton of games if they find the right quarterback, and he is pretty good. That's all.
I think that's right, Dan.
Okay.
So there you go. You did Arizona. I did Georgia Tech. Let us know what your thoughts are.
Yeah.
solidverbal@gmail.com is the email. Reach out on social media. All right, Dan, joining us now, titled newspaper sports writer turned founder publisher of the web's #1 Maryland Terrapin site from InsideMDSports.com, Jeff Ermann. Sir, welcome to the Solid Verbal. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So look, we're doing this like series of episodes now where we're talking about how teams can take the next step. And for Maryland, Dan and I kind of just vaguely defined it as 8 wins or a steady 8 wins. It's notable on the Maryland side that they got there last year after the bowl game, fell a little bit short during the regular season, but it was a 1-win improvement from 2021. Is that a fair assessment of Maryland football to get to 8 wins consistently? What do you view as the next step?
I think that's a fair assessment. Unlike most college football fans, Maryland fans aren't delusional about it. They don't expect to be competing for Big Ten titles every year, going to the college football play. Not that they wouldn't love that, but you have to be realistic about it. It's been a down cycle for the program the past 20 years. When Mike Locksley took over 5 years ago, they had losing records 4 or 5 years in a row. They had obviously the tragic death of Jordan McNair and the ensuing controversy, DJ Dirk inspiring. So long story short, I think when you combine that background with the fact that they're going up against Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State every single year, which will change soon with, the elimination of divisions, which will help them a lot. But as of right now, I think most fans would be thrilled to get to that 8-win level on a yearly basis.
You mentioned Mike Locksley stepping in. The last 2 seasons, I think, have certainly represented an improvement in the Maryland football program. From your vantage point, what's working? What's not working? What does he need to improve in order to maybe get to that next echelon?
I would say what's working is recruiting. Recruiting has obviously improved quite a bit. That's no surprise. That's what Locksley's been known for his whole career. The offense has significantly improved. I think if you're trying to point to something that's not working, the defense has really just been perennially toward that bottom tier in the Big Ten since they joined the conference. They've lacked the depth and the size in the trenches, which, as we all know, is half the battle in the Big Ten. They did make, pretty significant, I think, improvements last year under Brian Williams. It was his first year as their defensive coordinator. I think most people view him as kind of a rising star. So they did make some incremental improvements there. There's reason for hope there. But, looking at the big picture, that's, to me, been the clear weakness, since they joined the conference.
Does there seem to be confidence, in Mike Locksley as obviously as a recruiter? Definitely. As an in-game coach, as a head coach preparing his team to win winnable games, it seems that, you mentioned Maryland, these past few years, of course, having Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State in the division. But is this a team, is this a program that always feels like it's ready to win those tight games that are winnable against teams that are similarly or even lesser talented?
Yeah, that's a legit question, especially when you look at last year with all the penalties. They were one of the most penalized teams in the country. Mike, spoke after all the games, we got to get this fixed. They weren't able to get it fixed. So that is a legitimate question. On the flip side, though, you also have to give credit for competing with those top tier Big Ten teams last year. Every single year you could predict it. When they played Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, they were probably going to get trounced. Last year, they played Michigan really close on the road. A few different bounces go their way, and they had a chance to win that. And then at home against Ohio State, that went right down to the wire. So I think he's shown some improvement in that area, but it's still, like you said, it's something you need to improve upon, not only against the powerhouses, but again, like those teams you mentioned who are kind of your peers in the conference, like a Purdue, which was a 50-50 game. They made some mistakes and lost down the wire last year. If not, then you have 9 wins and things look even better.
Is there a position group? You mentioned the trenches. Is the trajectory somewhat promising that, either the offensive or defensive line groupings will be deeper and more talented and better able to hang with some of the better programs in the conference?
I think on the defensive line, it's possible that you're relying on a few unproven commodities, but the defensive line was solid but not great last year. Offensive line, to me, is the biggest question mark they have. They lost 4 multi-year starters. Then they had 2 more guys, one of whom was going to start, Mason Lunsford, a guard, transferred to LSU. Colton Deary, a center who was probably going to start, he transferred as well. So they're relying on a lot of transfers, a lot of unknown commodities there. They need to probably get a few more guys. They definitely need to get a few more guys out of the transfer portal there. So the offensive line, to me, if anything potentially could hold them back this season, it's that.
You mentioned recruiting being a strength, but how is recruiting in terms of balancing high school and portal? Does there seem to be an evolving vision? Do you have confidence that this is a program that knows what it's doing and has a plan to get to that 8 or 9 win level?
Yeah, I think they know what they're doing. They have, he's hired some guys recently. I think the Josh Gaddis hire, he's a really good recruiter. He'll help. They also lost a few. There was some turnover in the off season, but I think the ambition is basically to be in that top 30 range every year in high school recruiting, which is good if you're a Maryland. That puts you right in that top half of the Big Ten. And then, add transfers. This year they added, I think, last I checked, our rankings, 24/7 Sports had their transfer class number 13 in the country, which is pretty good when you're in Maryland. And, so much of it comes down to NIL. And, a lot of kids want to go to the big names. So they brought in a really strong transfer class. So, I think the recruiting, obviously, it still could get a little better, but based on where they sit in the ecosystem, it's been pretty solid.
You mentioned Josh Gaddis. They also bring in Kevin Sumlin. Is there any concern from you that there are too many cooks in the kitchen? No, not at all. I think Sumlin is a guy who was, just about out of coaching, basically. He was off in the USFL. And so I think for him, this is a window to get back into the game more so than I'm the guy kind of mindset.
Gaddis too was a little bit on the downswing. 2 years ago, the Frank Broyles winner at Michigan, and then last year kind of unceremoniously bumped out of Miami. So I don't think, when you combine that with he and Locksley had a little bit of beef in the past.
Right.
Locksley is a forgiving guy, but he's also the guy who, people, I don't like this phrase, he's alpha male. He's alpha, so he's not going to hire this guy without him fully knowing his role. So I don't see any sort of ego issues.
What's the vision look like post Talia at quarterback?
Well, they got a couple guys. Billy Edwards transferred from Wake Forest last year, ended up playing, pretty decent amount just because of injuries to Tagovailoa, and actually looked pretty good. I mean, they really liked him at Wake Forest. He runs. He's a bigger, more physical guy. He's not as hesitant to run, so he's more of a read option kind of guy. Can do a lot of things with his feet and has a pretty decent arm. Whether he can ever become a passer like Talia, that's probably a long shot, but I think he's got a chance to be a Big Ten starter. And then they've got another kid named Cam Edge, who came in a year ago, graduated from high school early. He was a 4-star recruited to Matha early in his career. Stock dipped a little bit, ended up committing to Maryland, and from everything I've heard out of spring ball, they really liked what they saw.
How does Maryland feel about its place within the Big Ten? Obviously, this is a program who makes the move a number of years ago, but doesn't necessarily fit the geographic footprint. And now we're going even farther west, with USC and UCLA. How does Maryland see itself in terms of being positioned to potentially, win those 8 or 9 games a year with added quality to the conference coming soon?
I think they see themselves. They see why, there's no reason we can't be a Michigan State kind of program. We're not going to be Ohio State, probably not going to be Penn State. There's no reason we can't be a Michigan State or maybe like a better version of Purdue. There's so much talent in the area. Everybody knows that. Every major school comes into the DMV to recruit players. It's a great media market. So they have a lot of things going for them. But at the same time, culturally, it's so hard to catch up on these schools like Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan, where it's a statewide religion. It's not a statewide religion in Maryland. If anything, Maryland basketball is. So, I think they see themselves as, I think on the basketball side, not to bring basketball, people say sleeping giant all the time. On the football side, like sleeping big dude, like not quite giant, but
a power forward. Yeah.
They have there you go. They have the ingredients to be a lot better than they've been, and they've shown progression the past 2 years. It's 15 wins 2 years combined is the most they've had in more than a decade. So I think that people feel optimistic that they can make that move to be in that second tier of the Big Ten.
They're competing with a number of the schools you mentioned, obviously within the Big Ten, but a number of schools outside of the Big Ten who come to that area to recruit. Do you get a sense that the administration, that the powers that be, that the money people care enough to win 8, 9 games a season? Is the investment there in facilities, in analysts, in support staff to compete on that level with who they're recruiting and competing on the field against?
Yeah, that was a big question for many years. And the answer is probably no. I think now they're inching more toward being able to say yes on that. Damon Evans, the AD, he's more of a football guy by nature. Obviously, you guys know he played at Georgia, was the AD there. So he's a football guy by nature. He's fully invested. They just gave Mike Locksley a big raise. It's going to average about $6 million during the final few years of the deal. So, that's up from $2.6 million a few years ago, where he was the lowest paid coach in the Big Ten. So there's an investment there. There's been an investment in staffing. The bigger question mark to me is the NIL piece. If the arms race just continues at the rate that it's at right now, these schools have so many boosters and so many different avenues to raise money, whereas for Maryland football, it's a tough go. So that's the bigger financial question to me than the school's commitment.
How often do you forget that Maryland's in the Big Ten now?
Well, I have to, I'm required to obsess about this stuff all day, every day. So I don't really forget, but there are definitely some fans that'll still tweet at me or, post on our Facebook page or message boards or whatever, like, we shouldn't have left the ACC or we can fix this. But I'm like, let it go. It's long over. And you know what? They got really lucky with that. Look how many schools are out there watching the developments of conference realignment, and would give anything to be in the Big Ten, where you just have insane amounts of money pouring in, 2 or 3 times as much as you have in the ACC. So, I get it. The biggest thing to me is you don't have a rival in either sport.
Right.
And it's hard to see, over the years, I'm sure something will develop organically, but it's not there. And it's been a while now, almost a decade. So that to me is, I get that. I get the nostalgia, but no, I don't forget that.
My counterpoint, by the way, is if Maryland were still in the ACC, they would have been winning so many games on the football field. It has been an incredible era to be merely pretty good at football in the ACC, as we're coming off of a Duke season where, they could have just won 10 games if a couple of things had bounced their way. So that's the only other counterpoint. But yeah, your point's well taken.
Yeah, that's spot on. And many fans have said that. I've seen that. If we were in the ACC, we could have won 2 more games. And it's 100% true. The ACC has become so mediocre for the most part, whereas in the Big Ten, even the middle tier schools are still recruiting at a higher level. They're still fully invested.
Yep.
So, but I think the flip side of that, like I said, is now that the divisions are going to be done away with pretty soon. That will make it a little more of a meritocracy now, because you won't have to, you'll get a little, because the West, as you guys know, is so much weaker every single year. It's like that period of the NBA for 20 years straight where the West was, 10 times better than the East.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's been basically like that. So erasing that, I think, will help their results.
In the spirit of this whole episode where we're talking about getting to the next level, and we've defined, I guess, 8 wins as the next level for Maryland. We're not doing an over-under show, but Maryland's over-under is 7 wins. I looked at the schedule, Jeff. They open with Towson. They play Charlotte. They play Virginia. They play at Michigan State. They play Indiana on back-to-back weeks to open up the season. It's not inconceivable that Maryland is 5-0 going to Ohio State first weekend of October. They only would need to win 2 more games the rest of the way. It does get tougher with Penn State and Michigan, and there's a road game at Nebraska, at Rutgers. You could see a situation in which they end up falling short of that 7. I have to imagine, though, you look at 7 and feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, you've got to feel good about that. I think if you don't get to 7, it's a fairly big disappointment.
Yeah.
Like the opening of the schedule, like you said, if you're not 3-1, 4-1, or whatever it might be, then something's gone wrong. The question with them and the wins totals is always, can you pull off that one big upset that's going to swing things in your favor? Whether it's Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, they haven't been able to do that year after year. Even if you take care of business against those other teams, if you're going to overachieve, you're usually going to have to pull off at least one decent sized upset. So can you finally do that? Because they've come close. They came close last year in those 2 games I mentioned, Michigan and Ohio State, but that's just not been part of the equation so far.
Gotta book Texas every year. Gotta get Texas on the schedule every year. Get that just balloon that schedule up, that win total up. It's just that easy, Ty.
It is. Jeff Ermann, where can we find your fine work?
You can find me at InsideMDSports.com or on Twitter at Jeff_ERMANN.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom, and we'll have to talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, Dan, there you go. Jeff Ermann, InsideMDSports.com, sharing some of his wisdom about what it takes to get Maryland to the next level, to the next step, to 8 wins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm most confident in Maryland, and then Arizona, and then Georgia Tech. I don't know if I told you to rank these ahead of time. That wasn't a homework assignment that I assigned to you. But Maryland, especially going away from the divisions, that makes sense that they will have a more varied opportunity to avoid a team like Penn State, who beat them 30-0 last year. And that's pretty good. That, we talk about Georgia Tech being handcuffed to Georgia on that schedule. Man, being handcuffed to Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State annually. And tough. If Michigan State's good, it's such a tall ask to say, all right, we're gonna spot you those 3 out of 4 losses or whatever, and then good luck getting to 8. So I think that's a big win for a team like Maryland.
Absolutely. And I think I would rank them in the same way. The recruiting's just better at Maryland.
Yep.
And they've been more active in the portal. Mike Locksley is a bit of a recruiting whiz, as Jeff alluded.
DMV. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we go Maryland. I think we go Arizona 2. And I think we go Georgia Tech last. Georgia Tech is still in that situation where they're kind of digging out from the old system. They obviously just turned over their coaching position, and they're trying to build some depth. So I think it's going to take a while to get there, but I think they can. I'm optimistic on all three of these fronts that they can get to the next step.
Yeah, Maryland does the thing. They have the calling card that they move the ball really well. They've recruited really good receivers. We've seen these past few years having that history of recruiting those top flight guys outside. They ran the ball really well a couple years ago. I think it was the COVID year where the running game took off. But yeah, they're a team. If they can get that pass rush from catastrophically bad, which is where it was last year, to somewhere that at least is threatening, they're interesting. Maryland's absolutely interesting, and they're obviously of these three schools the closest to achieving that high water mark. Are you a believer in Maryland?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I am. I do think it's really tough, though, given the hand that they've been dealt, because both Ohio State and Michigan are playing at a conference championship / playoff level. They have been for the last couple seasons. Penn State, I think, will be better this year. It's tough when you've got all three of those on the schedule. That being said, I'm not sure what to make of Michigan State, and I feel like there's enough variability elsewhere on their schedule that getting to 8 wins is very doable. So it's going to have a small margin for error, to say the least, but I think it's possible. It's
also one of those things with the portal that there's so much talent from that mid-Atlantic region, not to mention the DMV, of course, that even if they're going, somebody like Stephon Diggs, who actually played at Maryland, but like the top flight talent from that area goes to Ohio State, goes to Tennessee, goes to Alabama, goes to Oregon, goes to Texas, whatever. If it doesn't work out, that Maryland, look, this guy's not star, but he can be a rotation player on a winning team. He has the size and frame to be a solid defensive tackle or something like that. That's a nice advantage. We talked about that with TCU a little bit. Like the option to come home is a lot more pronounced when home is an area like the DMV or the Mid-Atlantic region than it is like, and come home and play in Colorado or something. So it's a nice feather in Maryland's cap for sure to build a quality roster.
Well, I'm thrilled we were able to get Jeff on. We've wanted to have him on for a while. So good to get him finally on the program, talk a little Maryland football. On the next episode, Arkansas, Missouri, and West Virginia. What's it take to get to the next step, the next echelon, the next level, Dan? Make sure you tune in. That one drops on Thursday. Make sure you also pop on over to verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. That's Patreon, where we do the bonus perks. Got all sorts of stuff that's starting to ramp up now as we get into mid-May, Dan. Before long, we're turning the corner. Before long, we're talking about over-unders. We're talking about preseason. We're talking about the 2023 college football regular season. So make sure you stay tuned here. If nothing more, hit subscribe or follow on your podcasting app of choice. Dan and I will be with you all throughout the long, cold months of the off-season, even though they're starting to get a little bit
defrost, Ty. Little defrostage. Yeah.
A little bit of defrostage. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrand. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to y'all soon. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.